What's up guys? This is finally the third part of my 3 gear videos. The first one was about audio, the second one was about filters, and this is the one that I'm probably most excited about. It's gonna be about lighting, and boy have I got a lot to say about lighting. So ironically, this is going to be the worst lit one out of the bunch because I'm actually going to show you my gear. So this is just me standing in front of the window. It's a little flat, not quite as fancy as the other ones, but we'll roll with it. Okay, so before we talk about the gear, I do want to say that I don't think lighting is necessarily about the specific gear that you use. Good lighting is more about understanding the principles of light. You could have some really cheap LEDs or some even like stuff you get at Home Depot, and you could produce great lighting as long as you understand some of the basic principles. And here are kind of the principles that I look at when I'm lighting things. So I think when you're lighting things, you're looking to create shape, color, and depth usually, and that's kind of what I'm looking at in addition to kind of getting something either really soft or really harsh. And that's kind of what I base all of my lighting techniques off of, and just kind of how I go about things. So one thing that I think is really cool is that all of the lighting fixtures that I use, like the Aperture 300D, the Mini 20s, all that stuff, it all fits in this suitcase. I know it's kind of a large suitcase, but it does fit in an overhead bin on an airplane, so that's really handy when you're traveling. A lot of these lights come with some cases, but I ultimately just kind of decided to consolidate it into a suitcase to make it simpler. I was kind of sick of taking multiple trips. When I shoot a wedding or something, I'm all about getting out of there in one trip if that's possible, so this helps a lot. Okay, so here are the fixtures that I use, and the first one is the Aperture 300D. This thing is just wonderful. I know Aperture has released a Mark II version, which is a little bit brighter and has a consolidated power/control system. This one's a little bit clunkier, not quite as bright, but ultimately I don't really think I need to upgrade it. This thing is just a beast. It says it's got the output of a 2K tungsten fixture. The output on this thing is so great. Okay, so next I've got the Aperture Mini 20s. I initially bought the kit of 3 of these lights. I ended up selling one of them, and I like these, but I don't love them. They're super useful for everything but a key light. You can use these nice little barn doors to shape the light quite a bit. The output is pretty decent on the Mini 20D. So this is a daylight balanced light. I also have a Mini 20C, which is bicolor, and the output is much less on the bicolor model. So keep that in mind if you're gonna buy one of these. I much prefer the Mini 20D. I think these are a great option if you're just starting out. One of my biggest gripes is that there is no power supply on this. It comes with a little clamp that goes on a light stand, so it's a little bit clunky, just like the 300D. It takes a little bit of extra time and effort to set these up, which I'm not a huge fan of. So if you're just starting out, you may look into something like a Came TV Boltzmann. It's a very similar Fresnel fixture, and the power unit is actually built onto the light with that one. Okay, so next we've got a couple of fun lights. This is the Yongo 360 light, and it's pretty bright. It's a nice little kind of quasar tube like feel, so I like kind of throwing this in a background sometimes. I sometimes like to kind of have it overhead illuminating something just to give it like a little bit of extra depth. You could do something like that. That looks kind of nice. The other really nice functionality is that it is RGB, so you can dial in and get nice RGB effects with this thing, which I am a huge fan of. That's really cool, and it's nice as an accent light, as a backlight, just getting some color contrast in your image. Okay, so speaking of little lights that really impressed me, this is the Torch Core LED. I may be getting that name wrong, but Core SWX LLC. So yeah, this light, you can find it, but it's kind of an expensive light for what it is, but the output on this thing is really nice, and it runs on these Sony NPF batteries, which I have a ton of, and it can run for a while without me really having to worry about it. So this is a nice little mobile light. If I've got, you know, my Mini 20s and 300D kind of static set up, I can move this guy around and use it to do little things with. And I really like the beam angle on this thing. It's a little more spotty. So you can see there, yeah, it's kind of spotty for an LED like this one. And the other cool thing is that it's by color, so you can do 3200 type look, or you can do a 5600 type look. So I think that's really nice, and yeah, the output is pretty intense. Okay, so moving on, let's talk a little bit about modifiers for lights. So we'll start with my softboxes. This is a newer gridded softbox, and this thing is really nice if you want a little bit more direction to your soft light. So I really like this, and I like the shape of it. You can kind of turn it in one direction, it's more vertically driven, and turn it in another direction and it's more horizontally driven, so that can kind of help you with the direction of the light. And then if I'm looking for just pure softness, I use, oh my gosh, this thing is way too big. I use the Light Dome Mark 1 just for the most soft image that I can get. But yeah, those are my soft boxes that I use, and mostly I'm using these for shooting people, interviews, stuff like that. Just getting that really soft light that looks really flattering on people. Okay, so this is one thing that I did upgrade, because I used to have the original aperture Fresnel mount. This is the Fresnel 2X. It's actually much better than the original Fresnel, and I've got these nice barn doors on it with the magnetic gel holder, so sometimes I'll gel this tungsten depending on the ambient light in the room. But yeah, this thing is great, and you can just circle it like this to dial in your beam angle, and it can get really spotty. It goes to 12 degrees, so that's like really spotlighty. Okay, so next let's talk a little bit about the support gear that I use for my lighting setups. I really like products by a company called Impact. So I've got 2 of these light stands by Impact that are really great. I'm also a huge proponent of using C-stands, especially for something like the 300D. I can't show you any of my C-stands, unfortunately, because they're holding this backdrop and holding my microphone. But that gets into the larger point of the fact that C-stands are awesome, and you can use them for just about anything. And then finally, I've got 3 of these Manfrotto air-cushioned little baby tripods for all the little lights. I use the torch on this, I use the Mini 20s on this. It's a little bit more sturdy than the aperture ones that came with the Mini 20 kit. In fact, I hated those, so this is a big improvement. Okay, so let's check out a few setups that I've created lighting-wise and kind of break down the principles that I use for lighting. Okay, so I ran out of daylight, so we're not doing the seamless aesthetic anymore. We're just gonna do it in the kitchen. And by the way, Kristin and I just got a new apartment, so that's super exciting. We just moved, so it's been a pretty long and crazy process because we've been also shooting weddings. We've been also super busy with a lot of other stuff with OcularPop. So it's been a little bit of a struggle lately, but we're almost moved in, so we're getting close. Okay, so I just want to break down a few different lighting setups and just kind of show you the principles. Like I said, we've got exposure, depth, shape, and color as like the main principles of light we're looking at. Let's jump into it. Okay, so the first one we got here, this is a nice dancing photo. What this lighting setup is a 300D mounted back here, so can kind of tell that. And this is gelled, oh my goodness, I cannot type. 300D, if you can read that, is gelled tungsten because it's matching the ambience of the room. So when I first started shooting weddings, I was a little bit conflicted on if I should gel my lights or if I should just leave them daylight. And the answer I've kind of come to is if the ambience in the room is predominantly tungsten, then go ahead and gel it tungsten. If everything is primarily daylight or it's still daylight outside and you've got daylight coming through the windows, I'll usually leave it daylight. So that's kind of my mindset. So this was tungsten, and then right here, we've got a Mini 20. So, you know, pretty simple. That's just providing this nice backlight. And this is a really simple thing that I love to do. It's nice color contrast, orange and blue, and it looks really nice. They're very separated from the background. Their exposure on them is very much different from the background. So if we didn't have any lighting in this scene, then the whole thing would be a higher exposure. So they would be more blended in with the background. So in this case, not to mention there would also be a lot of noise because This is shot at probably ISO 400 or something like that. We're able to keep the camera settings to a minimum to keep the image really nice and clean, and then we're also able to really separate them from the background. So I like this example a lot. Okay, so moving on, this one is an interview that we shot recently, and so this is obviously a 300D with a softbox, and it's providing a really nice soft light. One thing that I really tried to do when I'm shooting interviews is make sure there's like a nice shadow right there, because I think that creates the most flattering image and that looks the best on people. So I had the light up really high and it was shooting down. Again, really nice separation from the background. And also another tip shooting interviews, this is my secondary angle. So for a secondary angle, I always like to shoot on the shadow side of the face because that's where you get the most shape and you kind of get the most interesting details on the face. If you shoot on the highlight side, then you're getting it a little bit more flat. So I think this provides the most contrast and detail. Here is the other angle of that shoot. So yeah, the 300D is somewhere up here coming down, and I believe I had this one cranked up to 100% because it is really, really difficult to keep your exposure in front of a window like this. So here's an example of toast lighting, and really, I mean, we're gonna see this principle a lot of 300D, gelled tungsten, Mini 20 back here, gelled daylight. Or not gelled daylight, but just Mini 20 balanced to daylight coming in to do a backlight. The ambience in the room was again tungsten. What I do like is this blue pillar back here kind of makes the daylight feel a little bit more motivated because it runs along the same line. So I think that's really nice. You can tell that I'm using a pretty strong Fresnel because you've got a very strong shadow right here. I would say almost a little too strong because it's kind of covering his face right here. But you know, I think this is a really solid example, and this is like one of my premier toast lighting setups, I think. So here's a bouquet toss. This one, pretty simple. We just have a torch LED off camera right here. Up in the balcony is actually where the 300D is coming and kind of lighting all of them. So we're getting this really nice hair light right here, and then everyone else is getting a really nice backlight down behind her. So that torch light is just really separating her from the background, so your attention is drawn to the bride and not anything distracting in the background. So I think that's really good, and then you do have this nice little backlight, so there is a little bit of depth going on with these people back here. So this is the setup I use for almost every bouquet toss, and it looks great. Here's the same wedding. This is just a nice dancing shot. This is that same 300D up on the balcony. It's again very spotlighty, very harsh. We can see, like, you know, this shadow of her finger is really, really harsh right there. And then I think directly behind her, we've got a Mini 20, and that is the same color temperature. But again, you know, we're backlighting, we're creating some separation here. We don't have quite as dark of a background, but again, you know, we've got quite a strong light on her face. So if we did not have any lighting in this scene, the background could very well be blown out in this case, trying to get an exposure on her face. So it's really important to bring along lights for stuff like this. That way you can get at least a consistent exposure on the subject and the background. If not, have the subject a little bit more illuminated. Okay, so this is a cake cutting. So I believe the Yango light was up here shooting them, and then over here was the torch LED. So this was like 4,000 Kelvin, something like that. And then this was closer to maybe 3,200. Man, my handwriting sucks. So this hair light was a little bit cooler than the key light on her. What's nice about this is they're lit both ways. So he's got consistent light on him, she's got consistent light on her. And I think this setup works out really nicely. So this is the same wedding. Here's a little behind the scenes image. I like these. So right here we have got the torch, and that's primarily lighting bride and groom right here. We've got the Yango light, and that's kind of a bit of a backlight, but it's also kind of illuminating this table, hoping to create a little bit of depth. Then the toast taker is going to be right at this podium right here. So we've got a mini 20, hoping to give a little bit of edge, and then another mini 20 gelled blue. That is going to give us a nice backlight with some different color going on. And then off camera, we've got a 300D spotted into this podium spot. This was a little bit of a complicated setup with a lot of lights. It took some time to set up, but I was actually really pleased with the result. Here's another image of how the toast turned out. We see we've got the DJ uplighting right here. So again, it's important to nail your lighting because you don't want stuff like that to be blown out or distracting. You want it to add to the image. And so you can see here, we're shooting at ISO 160 at f1.4. This is shot on an 85mm. So this is pretty much the ideal camera settings that I'm looking at for wedding toasts. And here's the final image. So I was really happy with this. You got a nice shallow depth of field. You've got, you know, the highlights kind of rolling off into shadow, and then you've got the strong blue backlight. The background is a lot darker, so he's nice and separated from the background. The depth is really nice. So this is another thing. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. It did take a little bit more work than I'm used to setting it all up, and it was a little bit of a overbearing setup, I might say, but the images turned out really great. So here's another behind the scenes image. We've got a torch LED right here. We got the 300D up high on a C stand, just how I like it. Those both look to be daylight balanced. And then let's see, we've got another image here. So this is the Mini 20D, and this is at 6,000 Kelvin. So that is the bluest it will go. So these lights are daylight balanced, and this is 6,000 Kelvin. So when we look at the final image, it's gonna show up kind of blue. It's a little bit closer to white, but it's kind of blue. And what I really like about this image is the shadows we got going on. It's not very often when you're shooting wedding toasts that you get this kind of nice shadow. It's very dramatic looking. I'm really liking it, especially with the dark background. You've just got a lot of contrast and depth going on the face, and I think that looks really interesting for something like a wedding toast. So here's another interesting one. This is just with the torch again, and this was just a very spur of the moment thing, bringing them out here, and I think it looks really nice. My goal wasn't to be too crazy with the lighting here because they're already getting a strong backlight from the car, but my goal was just to get a decent exposure on them so you could still see the whole scene really evenly. So I think it looks really nice. Okay, so here is another interview, and this one was just a one light shoot. We've got the 300D with a gridded softbox up here. So it was very important for this shoot to have the background be pure black. So we only used one light. And again, I'm just gonna draw you to a couple things with this one, namely the shadow right here, very flattering shadow. That's kind of what you're looking for. And we've got a bit of a soft Rembrandt look. It's a little bit more high key than your traditional Rembrandt, but that's kind of the look I was aiming for. So 45-degree angle of the light. And then I would also draw you to that nice eye light going on. You can see the eye light of the 300D, so that looks really nice. Let me tell you, this one was a pretty big challenge because there was not a good spot for the 300D. Oops, let me do this blue because it was daylight. There was not a very good spot for the 300D, so this was actually kind of the backlight for everyone. And then we've got a torch LED right here. Boom, lighting the couple. And then let me see, I've got another image here to show you. Okay, so what I did here, this Mini 20 was kind of the main key, and it was around 4,000 Kelvin. And I will show you why right here. Okay, so this is what the final image looked like. And you can see the Yango light back here. I didn't really mean for it to be left in the frame, but it kind of looks cool. It was supposed to be pointed down, giving a little bit of highlight on that table, and it didn't necessarily work out exactly how I had hoped. but you can see the nice 3D pop being created by the 300D. That's looking really great. And then what I really like again about this one is that shadow. This is, you know, the 4000 Kelvin Mini 20 coming in, and it's giving us a nice bit of depth on his face. So overall, I just think it's a super interesting setup for the lighting of this one, and it worked out really well for being a challenging lighting setup for me. Okay, so here is me, another YouTube setup. We've got 300D on a softbox right here, boom, hitting me in the face. And actually, I just have this desk light kind of turned towards me, giving me this nice little edge on this side, along with this green cactus giving me a little bit more edge over there. And that's the basic thing, but I also have a torch up high going down, lighting this desk, and also the Yongo light giving the wall this blue color. So what I was really hoping to do with this one is have the desk be kind of a natural, normal color, and then have the wall be blue. So if I just had the blue Yongo light, it would just be kind of a blue wash over everything. Here's another YouTube video, pretty basic, again, softbox 300D, you know the drill, and then also Mini 20 giving me a nice little backlight and kind of playing a practical in the background. And then finally, torch LED coming up right here, using the plant as kind of a cookie, giving a little shape on the backdrop. You know, pretty basic, but you know, looks pretty good, I think. So this was a wedding, oh my goodness, let me tell you, this was a wedding we just shot. Very challenging, very not ideal of a setup. This was on a rooftop of an El Phoenix in Dallas, and I would have loved for them to go out on the rooftop to do the toast, but they wanted to do them inside. It was very, very cramped inside, and there's almost no room to put them in a flattering spot or to put lights or tripods even. So we had a tungsten torch attempting to light the couple and the toast taker. So this was gonna be a pretty big challenge of what this light could do. And then we also have a Mini 20 right here. Again, not an ideal spot. A Mini 20 right here going like this at about 4000 Kelvin again, trying to give them all a backlight. So just a 2-light setup, and it's also shooting against a mirror. So that was a big challenge to kind of create depth on a mirror. So this is what it turned out like, and I was, you know, not crazy about it, but pleasantly surprised because it was a very challenging circumstance. We've got a nice highlight right there on the side of his face, and then, you know, a decent exposure on him. I believe my ISO was around 320 or 200, so we weren't really cranking the camera. My biggest gripe was just the mirror was a little bit dirty. So that's not quite ideal. I would have loved to take a few steps away from the mirror and blur that out a little bit more. But again, you know, it was a very, very cramped space and a difficult circumstance. So this is the last one I'm gonna show you guys, and it's another toast. So again, we've got the 300D back behind the head table, spotted in. It's very harsh. You can see that very harsh shadow right here. But it does look very flattering and provides a really good exposure. We've also got this Mini 20 back here, giving that nice color contrast again, and depth and separation and shape. It also is a little bit practically motivated because they have this photo booth back here that is the same color temperature. So this is another example of having your lights being practically motivated. It makes them look so much better and so much more authentic. So anyways, guys, that is it for the setups. And I guess one thing left to do is kind of to show you what I'm doing with this setup, maybe. Okay, so here is an overview of what we're working with here. So let's start with the key light up here. This is the 300D with that same gridded softbox that we talked about, and it is on a C-stand. It's sandbagged. It's raised up high, so there's not a ton of spill going up on the background. And then here's what I did with the Mini 20s. So this one has a CTO gel overlapped, and it's very, very orange, very, very warm. It's shooting through this plant as kind of a cookie, giving just like some nice little bits of light going through. Same thing over here. It's not quite as warm. This is the Mini 20C set to 3200, shooting through this Monstera plant, giving a little bit more of that little depth on the background. Here's the torch LED. This was just a nice little backlight for me. And then finally up here we got the Yango. It's blue on the RGB, just giving a little bit of blue on the cabinets, and that's the setup. So anyways guys, that was it. Let me know what you think of my lighting gear, my lighting philosophy, and all my lighting setups. Let me know if you have any beef with those. Let me know if you just love it, and I will see you in the next video.